Hello and welcome back to the STARNES'S storeroom. This time we're discussing Britain's nuclear deterrent, the V-Force and associated equipment. Also joining the discussion today is Mr. Ian Starnes, our fellow collector and aviation enthusiast.
Hello there. By the late 1940s, it became clear that Britain needed its own nuclear deterrent, with the Cold War with the Soviet Union warming up. The Air Ministry decided it needed two competitors to deliver Britain's nuclear arsenal. The Avro Vulcan and the Handley Page Victor were both selected to be developed. But because of their radical design, a third type was also ordered, the Vickers-Armstrong Valiant. This was a more conventional shape, just in case the other two didn't work. On the table we have models in 144th scale of the three V bombers, the Vickers Valiant, the Avro Vulcan and the Handley Page Victor. All three carried Britain's nuclear deterrent, and by the 1960s the blue steel standoff missile was also carried by the Vulcan and the Victor, although the Valiant was used in development of it. The Valiant used to carry the Blue Danube nuclear freefall bomb, whereas the Vulcan and Victor could also carry that, but also were later equipped with the Blue Steel standoff missile, which had 1,000 miles range, leaving the missile to go onto the target while the Vulcan returned to base. As you can see, the nuclear capable aircraft were mostly painted white. This was to reflect the flash off the nuclear weapons, hopefully to reduce any damage to the airframe. In a moment we're going to be looking at an ejector seat out of the Handley Page Victor, which was arguably the best of the three aircraft, having a greater range, a larger bomb load, and could fly higher and faster than the other two. However, when the V-Force was required to go low level at the end of the 1960s and the Royal Navy took over with the Polaris missile, free-fall conventional bombs were required at low level. Now, when they tried to do this with the Valiant and the Victor, they were finding stress cracks, so in the end just the Vulcan carried on with the low level mission. The other two were turned into refueling tankers.
Okay, so now I'm sat in a Victor ejector seat. Ian over here is going to give you a talk on all the fine detail of this seat.
Okay, well this is a Mark III L2, the 2 denoting that it's the right hand seat, the co-pilot seat, out of a Victor bomber. I couldn't find any registration number on it, but there again they were swapped from plane to plane, so maybe that's why. We're now up to the Mark 16 seat these days in the Eurofighter Typhoon and the Lightning II interceptors, so this is quite an early seat, the Mark III. Marks 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 all had a 2-pack explosive charge fitted up the rear of the seat. So inside this section here was this blast tube, and that had the 2 explosive charges in it. On ejecting then, the top handle would be pulled. This releases a face blind over the pilot's face, because you may be ejecting into a 600 mile per hour oncoming wind. This is going to damage the eyes and facial features, so this face blind is preferable. However, the aircraft might be so out of control that you've got so much G-forces you can't physically lift your hands to reach that lever. So in between the legs there we have another handle for an emergency use in case you have to eject using that handle. On ejection with these early seats, because it's an explosive charge, you're temporarily pulling 54 G. This causes spinal injuries. Typically you'll be 2 inches shorter after ejecting than before. So you usually have to go into hospital on traction to pull the spine out again. From the Mark 6 seat up to the latest ones, instead of the explosive charge they have a rocket pack which is fitted underneath the seat pan under this section here, and that's a more progressive acceleration, up to 100, 150 feet typically, high enough to get the parachute out so as you come down on the parachute without hitting the ground before it opens. On ejecting then, first of all the canopy will fly off the aircraft, a drogue gun will then fire off. You can see that silver piece there. That fires up, pulling out what's called a stabilisation parachute. That's that small chute we can see here. That stabilises the seat because it could be tumbling. If it tumbled and you let your main parachute out, you're going to get all twisted and it wouldn't work. Having stabilised the seat, a second slightly larger chute comes out. This slows the seat down to an acceptable speed range under 200 miles per hour for the main parachute to deploy, which is strapped to your back. Once this happens, the quick release harness here automatically releases all 5 points of the harness. You and the seat separate, the seat comes down, and hopefully nobody's underneath it, because these seats are pretty heavy, typically around about 100 pounds in weight. Anyway, you come down on your parachute, and if you land in the water, you have, in your personal survival pack, you have a single man life raft, bright orange, so as the rescue helicopter can spot you. Also, you have your personal survival pack equipment. Now, there's various different types of equipment that can go in there depending on what terrain you're flying in. If you're flying in the jungle, it's going to be different equipment to landing in the sea or the desert.
In the late 1960s, the Royal Navy took over from the Royal Air Force's V-Force to deliver Britain's nuclear deterrent. It was realised that bombers and their bases were too vulnerable to preemptive attacks.
The first missile, after a startling off-angle emergence, corrects itself and soars downrange 1,100 miles to its target with remarkable accuracy.
The Polaris nuclear missile was deployed in 1969 in a submarine fleet that was very difficult for Soviets to locate.
Ready? Okay, the Vickers Valiant was the first to be retired from the Royal Air Force in the mid-1960s. This was due to finding stress cracks in the wings. They were converted from bombers to tankers to a large extent, but they had to be withdrawn very quickly in 1965. They became unsafe to fly. Next to be retired was the Vulcan in 1982. It was about to be retired when the Falklands War kicked off, and it was the only thing available that could fly all the way down to the South Atlantic, an 8,000-mile trip. And it was the longest bombing mission in history, operational bombing mission. They dropped 21 1,000-pound bombs on Port Stanley airfield, one of them taking the runway out, denying the Argentinians use of it. The final aircraft in service was the Victor, Handley Page Victor. This was converted to tanker duties because it was no good for low-level flying. They realised that low-level was the way forwards from the late 1960s. High-level aircraft could be shot down by Soviets' missiles, so they had to fly low-level. The Victor finally left service in 1993, so was the last of the V-Force to be flying. One flew again accidentally about 5 years ago at Bruntingthorpe Airfield. Got to a height of about 100 feet, but that was totally unauthorised. The Vulcan to the Sky Trust kept the Vulcan flying till 2015, and this was on the show circuit. It wasn't supported by the Royal Air Force, and it was very expensive to fly. They flew it as long as they could until it needed a major overhaul, which just proved too expensive. They were also out of engine hours. The engines are timed, and once the hours are up, then no more flying. So you'll never probably see a V bomber fly again. However, quite a few are preserved in museums, except for the Valiant, where there's only one left, and that's at the Cosford Museum down in Shropshire. In fact, if you go to the Cold War Museum there, you'll see all three together. It's quite a visit, well worth seeing. That's the V-Force.
Okay, so that's that anyway. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. On the next one, we're going to be discussing another military impression, so I hope to see you then. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you then.